Hello, everybody, and a Happy New Year to you all. And may 2026 bring you nothing but joy and happiness. Today I will tell you the story and a haunting case about Larry Griffin. Larry was a postman from Waterford and completely vanished from the face of the earth on Christmas Day 1929. Now, Larry was born in Waterford City in 1880 and joined the British Army in 1899 at the age of 19. He served in the artillery regiment and was drafted to India until his return back to Ireland in 1907. Larry was not long home from the army when he met a beautiful lady called Mary Fitzgerald. They both fell in love and they married that same year. They would go on to have 3 beautiful children together. But because of Larry's bravery and skills, he was called back to the armed forces and rejoined the army in 1914. This was just before the start of World War I. 2 years later, on the 3rd of June 1916, Larry was discharged from the army due to certain serious injuries caused by a bomb that disfigured half of Larry's body, especially his face. So Larry returned to Ireland and he was awarded with 2 special medals of bravery for his services in the army. He settled down once again with his wife Mary and their 3 kids in the town of Kilmacthomas, County Waterford. Kilmacthomas is 16 miles from Waterford City. A year later, in May of 1919, Larry would get a job as a postman. It was custom back then for men of war to get a government job. And Larry was stationed in the small village of Stradbally, County Waterford, which is 8 miles from his home in Kilmacthomas. Now, Stradbally is basically on the cliff tops of the Irish Sea, which would make it very, very easy indeed to get rid of a body. But we will get to that part later in this very strange story. So on Christmas morning 1929, Larry got up for work early as he did every other morning, said goodbye to his wife Mary and his 3 children, mounted his bicycle and set out on his 8-mile journey to the post office in Stradbally, where he was based. But little did Mary know that morning that it would be the very last time that they would see Larry again. But before Larry left Kilmacthomas, he had one little mission to do. He stopped at his local church to pick up a sack of presents. The presents were for the children of Kilmacthomas, so he delivered them around. And then at about noon that Christmas Day, he proceeded on his bicycle to the post office in Stradbally. Later that day, as it was custom back then. Larry was offered Christmas dinner and a few little drinks from two different households. Just a little thanks for his service for the last 10 years as a postman. Of course, Larry accepted because he had a drink problem. And that's probably why they call Ireland the friendliest place on earth, because you're always offered in to anybody's household once they know you. Now, knowing Larry, he probably had a few too many whiskies that day during those dinners. And when he was finished, he thanked those kind people. He thanked them very much, jumped on his bike and headed back to the post office in Stradbally to clock out. He then mounted his bike again and headed for home in Kilmacthomas. But he never made it home that Christmas Day to his wife and children. In fact, he was never seen again. That Christmas evening was a very, very cold and dark evening, and his wife Mary began to worry. But she just guessed that Larry probably drank too much, as he always did. And instead of the long cycle home, 8 miles to Kilmacthomas, he probably stayed at a friend's house. Around 7:30 the next morning, St. Stephen's Day we call it in Ireland. Most people call it Boxing Day. A local man named David Connors was walking along a lonely country back road which led from Stradbally to Kilmacthomas. This was Larry's route. But suddenly he stumbled across a black bicycle in the middle of the road, just laying there. He knew damn well it was Larry's bike, and it was a post office issued bike. But there was no sign of Larry. The bike just lay there, facing towards Kilmacthomas. So David Connors made his way as quick as possible to the Kilmacthomas Garda station and informed them of what he had found in the middle of the road. The Gardaí panicked, and it was on that morning, December 26, 1929, the biggest search in Waterford history began. The search party consisted of over 100 local neighbours and up to 25 Gardaí. Even members of the Kilmacthomas post office got involved. After about an hour into the search, 2 of the postmen, Larry's colleagues, reached the bicycle in the middle of the road. The 2 men looked at each other as they noticed that Larry's bag was empty. His waterproof overalls and his post office cape were strapped to the carrier of the bicycle. They said that this was very strange, unusual behaviour of a postman, as they'd never seen anything like this before. But somebody had to place it there, one said to the other. Now, on that cold, dark winter's evening, both sides of the road where the bike was found is completely covered in deep holes and marshland, which I know this myself, as I've travelled through that area thousands of times. I live only 20 miles actually from that area, and I know it well. The search continued deep into that cold, dark winter's evening, but there was still no sign or sound of Larry Griffin. Larry's disappearance was reported to Chief Superintendent of the Waterford Garda Station, Harry O'Mara. O'Mara straight away travelled to Stradbally to question a certain 5 members of the Garda that had taken part in the search. The 5 Garda's names were Sergeant Cullen, Garda Dulley, Garda Frawley, Garda Murphy and Garda Sullivan. It would turn out that Garda Dulley would be one of the very last men to see Larry alive. All 5 told the Superintendent O'Mara that Larry looked sober the last time they had seen him. Okay, let's hold on here for a moment. They told Superintendent O'Mara he was sober the last time they seen him. How could they have known that? How could the 5 men have known that Larry was sober the last time they seen him? Now this is where the plot thickens, my friends. Now remember back when I told you earlier that Larry had a couple of dinners that day and a few drinks. He probably had too many drinks. And I told you he got on his bike to head home to Kilmacthomas. But Larry decided to stop in a pub, Whelan's Bar in Stradbally, to have a few more drinks before he headed home. And this is the chilling part. It turns out that when Larry entered the pub, Whelan's in Stradbally, the place was full. Now, back then, the place shouldn't have been full on a Christmas day. There should be no drinking in a pub. Totally against the law. But it turns out that the 5 guards were there. The 5 guards I mentioned earlier. Garda Cullen, Dulley, Frawley, Murphy and Sullivan were all sitting in the pub that Christmas day, drinking and drunk, while on duty. And it will turn out at the end of the story that they also made their way back to Waterford Garda Station and altered their reports of what happened on that day. The books, the timeline, they altered everything, changed the whole lot to hide what is about to be told to you. But Chief and Superintendent O'Mara was not a silly man, and he would later go on to discover what those 5 Gardaí had done when he checked the books. Now O'Mara suspected foul play and corruption within the force. And on the 6th of January 1930, 13 days after Larry's disappearance, a local priest came forward to contact Super O'Mara. And the priest told O'Mara that the 5 Stradbally Garda were in the pub that day and they were hiding the truth. And they really, really needed to be investigated. So a huge investigation began in the Waterford Garda station about the 5 members of the Gardaí. They were all interviewed. Furthermore, 17 days later, on the 23rd of January, 2 Kilmacthomas villagers, Jim Fitzgerald and Thomas Corbett, came forward and gave their statement. And they told Superintendent O'Mara that they had also been in the pub that Christmas Day, along with Larry Griffin. And Fitzgerald would tell O'Mara exactly what happened to Larry. And that the landlord of that pub, which was Whelan's pub, the landlord Patrick Whelan and his wife Bridget were involved in what happened. Now this is Jim Fitzgerald's official statement of what really happened on that Christmas Day back in 1929 and what caused the death of Larry Murphy. Jim said at Whelan's pub it was full to the neck that day, and Larry was very, very intoxicated, probably from the drinks he had, the whiskies from those dinners, and that Larry dropped 3 half-crowns on the floor, which is an old money. And Ned, the gravedigger, picked him up and offered to buy everybody in the pub a free drink using Larry's money. Jim would go on to say that Larry tried to get his money back from Ned, and as he reached for Ned, he stumbled and fell towards the front door of the pub. And while doing so, he fell and cracked his head on the stove. But that, my friends, is not what really happened, as later on Jim would go on to change his statement. When Jim changed his statement, he said that Larry was pushed by Ned, the gravedigger, and Ned had stuck out his leg to trip Larry. And that is what made poor Larry stumble to the floor and crack his head off the stove. It was also said that the school principal, Tom Cashin, was at the bar that day, and he didn't like Larry very much. And as Ned pushed Larry, Tom Cashman got a dig in at the back of Larry's head. Now I know this is all confusing with all the different names, but it will all come together at the end, believe me. When Larry smashed his head off of the stove, he fell to the floor and there was no movement. By this time, Ned the gravedigger had realised what he had done, and he rushed over to check on Larry's condition. He felt Larry's pulse, but there was nothing. He looked at the landlord of the pub, Patrick Whelan, and shook his head as if to say, no, he's gone. This is when Pat Whelan ran out from behind the bar, shouting and screaming, "Oh my God, I'm ruined, I'm finished. I'm in so much trouble. Somebody has been murdered in my pub. What will I do?" The room grew silent. Everybody looked at each other with awe. Pat then said to everybody, "We have to come up with a plan here. We have to come up with a plan to get rid of the body." Everybody looked at each other, but they were so scared because there were so many members of the Gardaí in the pub that day, drinking on duty. They did not know what to do. Most of them stayed, while a handful ran away and left the pub with fear. But they knew they would later be approached by those 5 members of the Gardaí and threatened to be silenced. And so it was. Those people who left the bar with fear were actually followed that day and threatened by the Garda not to say a word about what happened to poor Larry. But Ned the gravedigger, who had caused all this, came up with a perfect plan straight away. And school teacher, Principal Tom Cashin, who was standing at the bar and snuck in that dig into the back of Larry's head. Tom was the only person in the village that owned a car. So the perfect plan was just about to emerge. So Ned Morrissey, the gravedigger, Patrick Whelan, the owner of the pub, Thomas Cashin, the principal who had the car, and another man named George Cummins, wrapped up Larry's poor body in a blanket and placed him into Tom's car. The 4 men left the pub with poor Larry in the back of the car, dead. And while they were driving, they were thinking and thinking about the perfect place and the whereabouts of which they would dump Larry's body. 3 weeks went by, and Super Chief Intendant O'Mara and everybody else in the village had no idea of what happened to the missing postman Larry Griffin. Why? Because most of them were silenced. But Whelan's pub and Tom Whelan, the landlord, was definitely at the centre of the investigation, according to O'Mara. But things would soon change. They would change when a certain man that was in the pub that day, a man called Thomas Corbett, came forward and gave a statement. He told the Gardaí and O'Mara that he had witnessed the exact incident that happened that day, and later told that night back in the pub that he had heard the landlord, Patrick Whelan, mention to somebody in a soft voice something about the copper mines that was in the area. So after hearing about the copper mines, O'Mara decided to take the second search straight away to look for Larry Griffin's body. They would focus on the mining sites in the area and all the mining shafts. Now, some of these mining shafts were more than 50 foot deep. They searched and dragged those mining shafts, but there was still nothing. No body was discovered. Where was poor Larry Griffin? Straight after that search, Chief Superintendent O'Mara arrested Thomas Cashin, Ned Morrissey, Patrick Whelan, George Cummins, Patrick Cunningham, Bridget Whelan, the wife of the landlord of the pub, and the Whelans' son and daughter, Noah and Jack, because they were also there that day and witnessed what happened to poor Larry. Superintendent O'Mara also arrested Garda Murphy and Garda DeLay on February the 3rd, 1929. That was 10 arrests in total. The four main culprits of this missing man was the gravedigger Ned Morrissey, Tom Cashin, the school principal, Patrick Whelan, the landlord of the pub, and George Cummins. They were all charged with the murder of Larry Griffin because they were the four men that drove Larry from the pub that night. The court case was held on the 7th of March 1929 at Waterford Courthouse. But because there was still no evidence of Larry's body, the judge was only going on stories that was told. They needed to find Larry Griffin's body to charge these four men with murder. But sadly, the case was dropped. And everybody that was in the pub that day actually celebrated the victory, that they were all free. But you could imagine Larry's poor wife Mary and their children. Everybody knew a man was murdered in cold blood. But nothing was done. To this day, coming near the end of 2025, the disappearance of the postman, Larry Griffin, sadly still remains unsolved and probably will never be solved. Sad to say.